Today I'm announcing the impending closure of Kingston Penitentiary and the Regional Treatment Centre in Kingston, as well as Leclerc Institution in Laval, Quebec.
That's the Public Safety Minister, Vic Taves, announcing the closing of 2 federal prisons and also 1 mental health facility. He says these closings will save $120 million a year. But in closing, for example, the Kingston Penitentiary, Canada's oldest penitentiary, also which houses some of Canada's most notorious mass murderers, child sex killers, people like Paul Bernardo are there. Where will they end up? What about the over 135 prisoners being treated for mental illness in another regional treatment facility? Where do they go? We asked for an interview with Vic Taves. He declined our invitation, but we're joined now by Candace Heoppner, who's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety. Candace Heoppner, Kingston has over 400 prisoners. The first question on a lot of people's minds is, where will Russell Williams, where will Paul Bernardo end up?
Well, Evan, all of these inmates will go to facilities that will house the sentences that they have been given. So, for example, individuals who have been sentenced to maximum security facilities will be placed in maximum security facilities. We have a lot throughout the country. Both of these facilities that we're closing down were very old. Kingston, being extremely old, almost 175 years old. So it makes sense to close them down, to move inmates to facilities that are more efficient, that are safer for guards to operate in and to do their job.
But, we don't have Ontario as a province where, let's say, Russell Williams and Paul Bernardo are housed in Kingston. There's only one other max there. It's Millhaven. It doesn't have the capacity to take all the prisoners that will have to leave Kingston. So I guess the question is, where will they go? What other province may have to house these kind of people?
Well, those are decisions, Evan, that will be made by CSC. Those are decisions that are made by experts and by the people who obviously have to make decisions like this every day, because sometimes prisoners are transferred to other facilities for other reasons. So, again, these inmates will all be transferred to facilities that will be able to house them to the level that they need to be incarcerated. And there, again, throughout the country, there are facilities. I think the message today that we want to get across to Canadians is that we're using their taxpayers' dollars wisely, that we're looking at inefficiencies, we're looking at ways to best deliver the things that the federal government is delivering.
But we don't know if there will be
penitentiaries is one of them.
I mean, you are still spending hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars, building over 2,500 new facilities, spaces for 2,500 new prisoners across the country. You're adding to old facilities. Some say it would have been smarter to build a new facility instead of now having this kind of short-term accommodation policy by spreading these people across the country. And what do you make of that criticism?
Well, we disagree with that assessment. We've been accused by the opposition for the last 2 years of building new prisons, and we have said that we are not going to be building new prisons. There have been prisons that have been neglected and have no infrastructure investment put in them over the last 20 years, and so we are making investments, and in some cases we're adding capacity to those facilities. And then in doing that, we were able to look at facilities like Kingston, for example, and recognize that it's very, very costly to keep a prison that old, to keep that up to date and to keep it current. So, we're making these decisions. We looked at the community. We also looked at which facilities had other prisons around them, so that whether it's guards or staff, they would be hopefully the least affected and not have their lives disrupted.
Now, some of the unions are saying you didn't consult with them and that these decisions, if you'd consulted, would have been made differently. Let me show you what Jason Godin from the Ontario chapter of the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers said earlier today about moving some of these, not the maximum security, but the mid-security prisoners, inmates, into their general population. Look at what he said.
We have so many problems with gangs, organized crime. We have all kinds of mental health cases, which you can't just assimilate those groups into other populations, into other institutions. It's going to create a lot of problems.
Basically, he says moving prisoners around, you just can't do it very easily. It's very, very difficult to do, and it could, in fact, endanger the guards.
Well, we really respect the work that the guards do, and the fact that they put their lives on the line every day in the work that they do. And I think that all of us recognize that these decisions, nobody said that they're going to be necessarily easy, but they're the right thing to do. And I think that as we work together.
Did you consult with them enough, though?
I think that we did, and I think that what we want to keep doing is consulting with them, and I think we want to work together towards the common goal, which is, making sure, obviously, that frontline officers are safe, that they're in facilities. I mean, I visited some of these facilities where they're old. The line of sight for the guards is incredibly difficult and not safe. They can't actually see down the range, and they've asked for improvements. We want to make sure that they're safe in the work that they do, while at the same time using taxpayers' dollars wisely. And I think this is good news.
Well, one other question on this, which is the regional treatment facility. Just about 146, I think, men who are housed there. They have mental illness. They run pretty sophisticated mental illness programs. There's been a lot of criticism that the prison system has basically been used to throw in people with mental health issues. Where will you house 146 men at the regional treatment facility? Where do they go now? What facilities do they have across the country to deal with those mental health issues?
Well, you're right. Our system in Canada, our correctional system, actually is recognized throughout the world for some of the best programs in terms of mental health treatment. And any individual inmate who requires mental health treatment will continue to get it. It's in the best interests of everyone, whether it's the officers who are on the front line, whether it's...
But where will they go? The question was, where will they go, though? When you take 146 out of the regional treatment facility, where they have the programs, they have the facilities to do it, it's been renovated in the 90s, where do they go to get the same treatment? Because it's pretty tough to serve them in other prisons.
Well, we believe that we will be able to serve them. We have openings and we have capacity in other prisons, and we're going to make use of that capacity. We don't want that capacity to go unused and then continue to put taxpayers' dollars into facilities that are old and really wasting money. So these are decisions that will be made by CSC, and these prisoners, obviously, they're going to go somewhere. They're not going to be going out on the street, and those inmates who need treatment will receive the treatment that they need. Again, I think this is a really good news story. And, I recognize, and I think our government recognizes, that any time we make changes that, it can be difficult for the people whose lives are affected. We want to have the least impact on obviously on staff and on guards and on inmates. So we're trying to do this, in the best way possible. But it's a it's a very old prison. It costs a lot to keep these facilities up.
Kingston Pen, it's true. Let me bring in the opposition, because the Kingston Pen, you're right, is an old facility, very old and very expensive to keep up. But the regional health facility, Leclerc is only built in the 60s, so that's a different situation. Let me get what the NDP Justice critic Jack Harris, he's in St. John's, he's now joined us, and the Ontario Liberal MP John McKay is in Toronto. Let's get their views on this. First, let me go to Jack Harris. Mr. Taves, the minister, said today, look, the opposition had been wrongfully inflating the numbers about the new offenders that would be needed to be incarcerated after the Omnibus Crime Bill, Bill C-10, became law. And he said, look, the numbers are a lot lower, and that's why they have the capacity now to be able to shut down prisons like Kingston and distribute those prisoners around. And nowhere near the 3,500, closer to 1,000 extra prisoners. What's your view on that?
Well, first of all, that's nonsense. I mean, Bill C-10 just became law in the last month or so. It was just received royal assent. So we don't know what the effect is that going to be. We do know that the cost of the Correctional Service of Canada has gone up 20% last year alone, $475 million to pay for 2 of the previous crime bills. And now we've got, this omnibus bill, which hasn't really kicked in yet. So, this is a very premature decision. They're talking about saving $120 million. The facility, the mental health facility at Kingston is the only one of its kind in Ontario. Where are these people? You don't just pack them up and move them along. The Correctional Investigator Howard Sapers is complaining about that. Obviously, he did say he's not sorry to see the doors close on Kingston, but the 2,700 new cells that they said were going to be built, that they planned to build, only a handful of them were in operation, and the Correctional Investigator has already complained about the fact that the double bunking is increasing and increasing. So this is being done for, I think there seems to be some public relations aspects of this, because they want to downplay the idea that their prison's agenda is actually having the effect that it does. This is going to make things worse. It's going to move 1,000 prisoners and 1,000 correctional officers to we don't know where.
All right, just to be fair, Vic Taves did say that there will not be increase of this double bunking. There's already about 1,200 inmates that are double bunked. But let me get John McKay on that. I just want to make sure. I mean,
you know, he can say that, but you know, what kind of credibility does this government have on letting the public know exactly what's happening here? You know, we talked about this. We didn't have any really good reasons for this other than to say, oh well, as Candace Heoppner just said, well, they can't see down the ranges. This has been going on for a long time. We never heard anything about this before. If there was a real study and a plan, let's make that public so the public can actually have a look at it, because we don't really trust those guys.
Let's get John McKay in there. John McKay, what do you make of these closings?
Well, this government has never let evidence get in the way of ideology, and so here we have a government going to close, in effect, 1,000 people. And these are the toughest of the tough. These are the most difficult mentally ill patients. And they're going to sort of spread them through the whole system. Well, you know, every time you put somebody like Bernardo or Williams into another facility, there's other accommodations that have to be made. So, you know, the minister didn't say that, well, we actually have excess capacity in any of the other facilities. I've always been given to understand that each facility is at the maximum and there is no other room. Then you put that in the context of never coming clean with respect to the additional prisoner load that will inevitably come by virtue of this stupid on-crime agenda, and the impact of this decision is potentially catastrophic, not only on the inmates who will inevitably be double bunked. Inevitably, their programs will be cut back, but on officer safety, we'll have to look after more people with less resources. And the ultimate result of that is that some of these people will potentially end up on the street. Maybe not these people themselves, because these are the toughest of the tough and the most difficult of the most difficult, but you will start pushing other people out onto the street, maybe before they should be out on the street. So this decision is puzzling, it's bizarre, and it's potentially a great threat to public safety.
Let's get Candace Heoppner. Let's talk just quickly about this double bunking. It's done for medium security prisoners. Right, Leclerc is being closed, this prison, medium security prison. Now, we know that Collins Bay, and I'm showing you a blueprint right now, is being built nearby. And you and I have spoken about this before. We obtained these blueprints that, in fact, it's being built so it could, if necessary, house 2 prisoners for 1 cell. All right, so I guess my question is, here you are, we have plans for a prison nearby being built. You're closing one, so is the arithmetic here that you're going to now, this new influx of prisoners will go over to Collins Bay and some will be double bunked?
Well, you know, to answer that question, any smart business, government, or individual, when building any kind of facility, would build capacity into that facility, and that's, you know, as you and I talked about, giving the requirement or providing the requirements if double bunking is needed to have those obviously built in at the planning stage. That's just being wise, but I cannot let what the opposition have just said go unchecked. I don't know, and if I'd like to just make this point. Yesterday, we would have had the Liberals saying the Conservatives are building new prisons and they're keeping people in jail too long. And now we are saying we're actually able to. Sorry, could I finish, Jack? Thank you. We're you know, it's mind-boggling how the opposition are talking out of both sides of their mouth and not held to account on it at all, able to get away with that kind of double speak.
Well, now we got the answer, I think, Evan, because what they want to be able to say is, oh, the opposition is talking about us building new prisons. We're actually closing prisons down. This is actually, this is optics. This is pure. Well, we do know that there's 1,200
Jack Harrison.
You don't understand the
hold on. Jack
Harrison. Capacity in other facilities.
We know there's 1,200 people double bunked right now. We're talking about moving 481 maximum security prisons.
Practice, Jack. It's a common practice in Western
Canada. Hold on, I can't hear you both.
1,200 double bunked prisoners. We're going to move 481 prisoners out of Kingston maximum security to where? We don't even know where they're going to be moved.
We have room throughout Canada. And newsflash, Jack, newsflash, we have room in other facilities.
Well, why do you, if they have room in other facilities, why do you have 1,200 people double bunked?
Jack, how old is Kingston? How old is Kingston?
All right,
maybe under the NDP government,
there's 2 issues here.
This is all about the government.
I'm going to go to John McKay because I can't get in between Candace Heoppner and Jack
Damage control here about the prisons agenda.
Just a second, Jack.
Serious damage control.
This is interesting. I'm going to put some facts on the table, John. timeline. There have been an influx of 1,000 new prisoners over the last 2 years, okay? Yes. 2 fiscal years. That's the equivalent of about 3 institutions worth, okay? Now, it's not the 3,500 that the opposition had talked about, but maybe, as Jack Harris says, it's early days post-omnibus crime bill. I guess the question is, now they're building about 2,500 new spaces to accommodate this. Is there space in the system to get rid of an old facility like Kingston? I mean, are you opposed to that?
Well,
not yet.
So John McKay.
Evan, you got your answer on double bunking because you showed the facility being designed for a double bunk. So we know what that answer is already. The effect, the cascading effect, is that when you move a Russell Williams or when you move a Paul Bernardo, they get a unique, how should we say, facilities. And so you bump the rest of the population down into less secure facilities. And some of the people you're bumping are not appropriate for double bunking, and you will therefore have not only the increase of the 1,000 people that you've talked about in the last 2 years, you will have additional increases from the bill that has yet to see its full maturity, which the government to this day has never presented a study as to the effect on the prison system, the cost that it's going to be to the Canadian taxpayer, and the downloading on the provinces. So anything that the minister says at this point is entirely ideology and it's speculation and is not based in any fact whatsoever, certainly no fact that they've ever presented to the Parliament of Canada.
All right, I got to wrap it up there. We're going to hear from Howard Sapers, but again, Kingston is being earmarked to close. By the way, just a last detail. Candace Heoppner, can you tell us exactly when that facility will close, the regional treatment facility and Leclerc? When will they actually be finally wrapped up?
You know, my understanding is it'll be 2013, 2014. That's the timeline that we're looking at.
All right. Interesting details today from Candace Heoppner, Jack Harrison, and John McKay reacting to this. I appreciate your time, all 3 of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you.
We don't have enough maximum security beds to manage this transition from Kingston Pen into the new units. We don't know when the completion of the new units are going to be, and we still don't have any real knowledge or impact on what Bill C-10 is going to have on us. So again, it just seems to us the cart is before the horse.
The union representing federal prison guards is raising a lot of questions and concerns about what penitentiary closures will actually mean. They say they're worried there isn't enough room to safely accommodate the displaced criminals, including some of the most dangerous offenders in the country. The government says otherwise. What impact will all this have on the already crowded prison system? Correctional Investigator Howard Sapers is with me now. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Let's start with the first question. The public probably is concerned. Can the system safely close prisons like Kingston and Leclerc prison and then reintegrate those prisoners? Some of them pretty hardcore prisoners. I mean, people think the headlines will be, Bernardo, Russell Williams, and reintegrate them into existing prisons.
Well, very difficult opening question because it's complicated. Lots of different populations in those prisons. Leclerc is a medium security institution, about 460 men there right now. Kingston Penitentiary, maximum security institution, over 400 there right now. And then there's a third institution, which is the Regional Treatment Center, an acute care facility, forensic facility for those most acutely mentally ill offenders, about 150 men there. So 3 different populations that have to be accommodated. If you start with the medium security ones, there are lots of medium security beds. Most of them are full. In fact, that's where most of the double bunking is right now. Most of them are over full.
Just so people understand, double bunking is a term where you have 2 prisoners to a cell meant for 1, and Correctional Services Canada says it should only be done in an emergency situation, but we do have it now, and new facilities are being designed with that in mind.
Yeah, about 15% of male offenders right now are double bunked, so that means you've got about 1,200 men living in substandard conditions. They're living in the top bunk of a cell designed for only 1 offender. That's today. Now, we've got a commitment from the service that they're going to stick to the policy of 1 man, 1 cell. They're going to build 2,700 new cells. Those cells are going to come online. That will relieve some of that double bunking pressure. But now we know we have to also accommodate this population from Leclerc. So we have to move those people out. We have to find the accommodation for them without that double bunking number going up. That is one case. Then you've got the maximum security offenders in the Ontario region coming out of Kingston. These are some of the hardest to house offenders. For many people, Kingston Penitentiary, particularly if you're in segregation in Kingston Penitentiary, that's the end of the line. Finding accommodation, safe, secure accommodation space for them, appropriate accommodation space for them, space that will still allow them whatever level of family contact that they get, space that will allow them to be housed in a secure way. That's going to be a challenge, and that's going to have to be phased in over the next couple of years. We don't have 400 vacant maximum security cells in Ontario. There's only one other max institution in Ontario, that's Millhaven. Its current max count is about 140, 150, something like that. Certainly can't accommodate them there. So that's going to be interesting. But perhaps the biggest challenge is the movement of those 150, I think today's count's 146, acutely mentally disordered offenders that are housed in the Regional Treatment Centre. Which was also announced today for closure.
There has been a lot of talk and a lot of reports that our prisons are essentially being used as mental health facilities in a way that's inappropriate. What could the effect of the closure of the regional treatment facility mean? I mean, where do those prisoners who need mental health treatment, they've been getting it under a centralized place in the regional treatment facility, now what happens to them?
I wish I had a good answer for that. I don't know. What I do know is that the service has 5 of these regional treatment centers across the country. They're all full. Some people have speculated that the current capacity of around 650 or 670 acute care beds is about half of what they need. Now we're taking 150 of those beds out of the system. The service is simply going to have to replace those beds.
But, you know, Vic Taves today said there's lots of capacity in the system. They're building 2,500 new spaces, not new prisons, but they're basically renovating and adding to new facilities. He said, look, you got Collins Bay, and we showed our folks here on Power and Politics. They're also, by the way, building in the possibility for double bunking in the new Collins Bay. As you say, Millhaven, they got the Bath facility around Ontario. Then they got Quebec, they got minimum security institutions in Laval, the Federal Training Center, and the Monte Saint-François Institution in Laval. So do they have, I mean, is there so much slack in the system that we can just close hundreds of beds and just disperse it?
Yeah, the Correctional Service of Canada operates at 57 sites across the country. They have over 15,000 beds. Now, if it was a hotel chain, you know, you'd say, well, a bed's a bed's a bed.
Right.
But it's not a hotel chain. It's a correctional service. Those beds all serve different purposes. You have minimum security beds, maximum security beds, medium security beds. You have women's institutions. You have male institutions. You have community-focused institutions. Right. So a bed isn't, you know, they're not all interchangeable. And where the service is most challenged, where the double bunking is most significant, at medium security, where the space is under such duress right now in treatment centers, these are going to be real critical challenges for the service to meet.
And so just keep in mind, folks, I mean, there's going to be a lot of attention paid to these maximum. Where's Paul Bernardo going to be housed? But for those 146, 150 inmates who suffer from mental illness, who are being treated in the regional treatment facility, that's another big question Howard Sapers is talking about. And I want to ask you another question, which is about the justification for closing these. Because, you know, there is hundreds of millions, possibly billions of dollars being spent adding 2,500 new beds to older facilities. But here's what Vic Taves said about the fact that it's still okay to close these facilities.
Every step of the way, our government was told by our opponents that our tough on crime policies would create a wave of inmates that would swamp the correctional system, including the creation of untold new costs. Quite simply, these new inmates have not materialized.
Fundamentally, just so people appreciate this, after what's called Bill C-10, the Omnibus Crime Bill, a lot of the critics said there'll be thousands of new prisoners, the influx into the system because of things like mandatory minimums or house arrest. Well, you know, he's saying that didn't happen. Therefore, we've got the facilities and the capacity here. What's your view on that?
Well, first of all, the minister's right. The worst case scenario has not been realized. The planning scenarios were for the worst case. If everything happens in a certain way, the numbers are going to go up by maybe 3,000 or 4,000 offenders over a short period of time. That didn't happen. What did happen is the count went up about maybe 1,000 this year over last. It's up almost a couple thousand if you want to go back to about 2005, 6, when really these policy changes started to roll out. So the count's up. Now, to put that into context, 1,000 new offenders is about the same number of offenders that are housed in the 3 institutions that are being closed today. So, 1,000 offenders is the equivalent of about 3 or 4 institutions. We haven't seen 3 or 4 institutions worth of new capacity come online. So that's how much more crowded the system has become in the last few years. Closing a 175-year-old prison that simply isn't capable of providing the kind of corrections that you would do in today's day and age is a good thing. So,
closing Kingston, no tears shed from your side.
Decommissioning that and moving into more modern, more purpose-built facilities that are more consistent with the needs of this population, aging offenders, etc. I think there's going to be a net benefit to correctional practice in Canada. So it's about timing. But Kingston Penitentiary is just one of the old penitentiaries. We've got at least 3 other penitentiaries that are 100 years old or more. Collins Bay, which you mentioned, was built in the 30s. We certainly have lots of old inventory.
Mind you, they're closing Leclerc that was built in the 60s.
Yeah, it was built in the 60s. Collins Bay in the 30s. Dorchester is over 100 years old. So, modernizing the system. Today, I think what we've learned is that we're going to lose 1,000 cells. Over the next 3 years, we're going to build up to 2,700 new cells, 2,700 new ones, net gain of about 1,700 cells. The real question is, will that be enough to absorb the growth as a result of all the policy changes?
Well, I will say, if the growth was 1,000 new inmates in the last year, it sounds like it's not enough over 2 years if that growth rate continues. I got to leave it there, Howard Sapers, but a fascinating development today. Again, these are long-term developments that we're watching them closely, but your perspective is absolutely great today. Thanks.